Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is feast. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear feast used is to mean to eat and drink large quantities of food. A second way you might hear feast used is to mean to entertain guests by serving large quantities of food. So with these first two definitions, there's a really kind of happy, positive meaning to this. Many times this word is used in connection to some type of celebration as well. A third way you might hear feast used is not connected to eating, and this is just to enjoy some pleasure or delight. So sometimes this is used to talk about what is one is able to see with their eyes or experience with some other sense, but again, not connected to eating. You should know that feast is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we're going to do is add ing to form feasting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The base verb, feast, ends with a T sound. So when we add the ed ending, we're going to add an extra syllable and pronounce it id. Feasted, feasted. Now, I have one phrasal verb for us to point out, and that is either to feast on or feast upon. Both of these phrasal verbs, again, refer back to that first definition of eating large quantities of something. And again, it has this really positive meaning. So the idea is not only you're eating, but you're eating with great pleasure and enjoyment. So an example of this might be, we're going to feast on turkey, dressing, green beans, and sweet potatoes tomorrow. In the United States, it's the Thanksgiving holiday, and so this is a particular verb that you might hear in connection with these celebrations. So, that idea of great pleasure. Let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the present perfect and the present progressive or present continuous. Let's start with the present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present, or we can use it to talk about an action that was completed at some unknown time in the past. Sometimes I use the phrase indefinite past tense as I talk about the present perfect. To make an affirmative or positive present perfect sentence, you're going to use have or has, depending on what your subject is. So if your subject's I, you, we, or they, use have. If your subject is he, she, or it, use has. And then we use the participle form of the verb. And since feast is a regular verb, our participle looks the same as the past tense. An example of this might be, we have feasted on beautiful sunsets and sunrises this week. Okay, so this is going back to that third definition, kind of thinking of pleasure and enjoyment. This is an activity. It started in the past and continues into the present. And I feel like it's really true for me. Several nights this week, there have already been these gorgeous sunsets and even more beautiful sunrises, beautiful pinks and purples in the sky. Now, if you want to make a negative present perfect sentence, just insert not after have or has. And then we're going to use that participle form of the verb. An example of this might be, the team's defense hasn't feasted on any others this season. As I looked for examples of this verb used in newspaper articles, magazine articles, I saw so many references to sports competitions and a variety of sports. I saw it in soccer, football, basketball, and others. And I think, again, kind of tying back to that third definition. So this isn't a sentence about eating. I think of it as almost like enjoying great success, maybe taking advantage of a team that isn't performing as well. So, finally, if you want to make a yes or no question in the present perfect, you're going to start with have or has, whichever form matches your subject. The subject comes next. And after that, we're going to use our participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Have you feasted on Thanksgiving Day? Right? So this is asking you to kind of look back at any point on this particular holiday in the past. Now, let's take a look at the present progressive. Some grammar books and teachers will use the phrase present continuous. These two terms mean the same thing. So we're using this verb tense to talk about an action that is in progress or something that is happening right now. We need two parts to make the present progressive. We're going to use a present form of be, so that's am, is, or are, and then we're going to use the ing form of the verb. An example of this might be, the sharks are feasting on tuna and mackerel. Okay, so here maybe I'm describing something I'm seeing right now, something that's in progress. The sharks are eating these smaller fish. If you want to make a negative present progressive sentence, just insert not after your be verb. And then you'll follow that again with the ing or progressive form of the verb. An example of this, the department isn't feasting on public funds. So here's another sentence, not about eating, right? But kind of this idea of enjoying and consuming a lot of money or resources in this particular case. Finally, if you want to make a yes or no question in the present progressive, you're going to start with a form of be, whichever form matches your subject. The subject comes next, and then we'll use that ing form of the verb. Here's an example of a yes or no question in the present progressive. Are those bugs feasting on you? So here it might be asking, right, if someone's getting many bug bites, right? And that idea of connecting sort of biting with a bug feasting on some part of your exposed body. Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at a related word and phrase with feast. The first word we're going to look at has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation as our verb. It's just the noun form of this word. The noun feast can have a couple different meanings. One is to refer to a large meal. And again, this meal is typically in celebration of something. An example of this might be, are you going to have a feast at your wedding reception? Right? So think a wedding, generally a happy, joyous occasion. After the actual ceremony, the wedding vows, it is common, many people will have a party, a reception, right? And they may have a large meal at that particular celebration. A second way to use the noun feast is to refer to just a large supply of something that is enjoyable. I saw this sentence in an article, and I thought it was interesting. This movie is a feast of comedy, right? So what that tells me is the movie that was being described is going to make you laugh a great deal, right? So there's a large supply of jokes and laughter. That's our something that is enjoyable. A third way you might hear feast used is in connection to religious holidays or observances. Typically, this religious event is done to remember a particular event, maybe a deity like a god, or some other person that is very important to a particular faith. An example of this, the Feast of St. Joseph is celebrated in March. So this is not connected to my particular faith, And so something I consulted in order to make this example sentence. You might use it in slightly different ways in connection to your faith. The last thing we're going to look at today is a phrase, to feast one's eyes on an object. And what we're talking about here is to be delighted by the sight of something. You might hear this phrase used in the imperative as a command. Like in my example sentence, feast your eyes on my new car, right? So I might be excited by this and I want someone else to be excited by the sight of this thing. Now, this is just an example. I do not have a new car. But I really appreciate you watching today. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving, I hope it is a wonderful day with your loved ones. Have a great one.